Nick C. What's the process by which a Sea Org member is condemned to the RPF? In other words, what is the Sea Org's equivalent of trial, conviction, and sentencing? In a related vein, what has to happen in order for a person on the RPF to be deemed ready to graduate? Hey Nick, thanks for the question. Short question, big answer. So I can't do a whole rundown on the entire RPF, but I'll give you some basic ideas here of how this works. There are a few routes onto the RPF. I only, in my entire time in the Sea Org, ever saw one person who tried to put themselves on the RPF. Now, the RPF, I should say, is the Rehabilitation Project Force, and it is a sort of a reconditioning or re-education camp within the Sea Organization. It is not for public Scientologists. It is not for staff Scientologists. It is only for the Sea Org. It is one of the single most abusive programs that Scientology or L. Ron Hubbard ever put together. It's been around since the 1970s when L. Ron Hubbard was sailing around on his boats. That was where it started. It has gone through many iterations. The RPF of the early 1970s is not the same as the RPF of the late 1970s. It's not the same as what happened in the 80s or the 90s. It's changed over the years and gone through various iterations. I did the RPF from 2004 to 2008. In that time period, it took me 3 years and 3 months to get through it. Eventually, I plan on writing a book about the entire program because it is that extensive. There are a number of issues Hubbard wrote and others have written about the RPF and how it's supposed to be run and how it's conducted and how you get off the program. So let me give you the quick rundown here. Like I said, there was only one person who ever tried to put themselves on the RPF, and they were kind of, no, that's not what you need. And, they got some other ethics handling and went and did some other things. The RPF is the most severe form of punishment or discipline that you can receive in the Sea Org, short of being, declared a suppressive person or kicked out of the Sea Org entirely. It is viewed as a chance at redemption or rehabilitation. You are there because you have committed some act or acts which are considered treasonous to the Sea Org. And that means you're in a lot of trouble. But rather than just kick you to the curb or beat you or throw you out, and I didn't say beat you, I said beach you. Beaching is when they just kind of throw you on the beach. When back in the day when people were on ships in the Sea Org, they just leave you on the beach. And in the Sea Org now, the equivalent of that is being kicked out. Rather than do that, they give you a chance to, redeem yourself. So the usual route onto the RPF is through what's called a committee of evidence, which is supposed to be a fact-finding body. It's the most serious, justice action that can be taken on a person in Scientology. But the committee of evidence is usually 3 to 5 people who are gathered together, go over reports and evidence, interview interested parties and the person who is named in the committee of evidence who is under investigation. And the committee is supposed to go over all the facts and come up with recommendations to determine what to do with this person in order to deal with whatever the problem was. A committee of evidence doesn't just it's a whole thing in itself, and I could do a whole video on just that. But basically, the committee of evidence is not necessarily supposed to presuppose that you're guilty. You actually have a series of charges against the Scientology ethics codes that a person is said to be guilty of, and the committee of evidence investigates and determines whether the person is guilty or innocent. And in their findings, they actually lay out step by step each of the Justice Code violations and whether the person is guilty or innocent, and whether the person pled guilty or innocent during the committee itself. So you might have, the charge might be theft, and the committee might write in the findings and recommendations, they might write, well, we interviewed the person, here are all the circumstances of the theft, we interviewed Joe Blow, he said he was innocent, and here are the specifics of why he said that, but we found he was guilty, here's what we found. And now all this is supposed to be written down so anybody can review the findings and recommendations and see what the actual facts of the situation are and why it was why the final recommendations of the committee are what they are. The committee's findings can be quite heavy. They can impose amends projects of hundreds of hours in length. They can order a person to sec checking. They can kick a person out of the Sea Org. They can dismiss a person from staff. Because committees of evidence are not just Sea Org actions. A committee of evidence can be done on a public Scientologist, a staff member, or a Sea Org member. It happens at all levels of Scientology, from the city level offices all the way up to the highest levels of the Sea Org. So let's say you find yourself in a lot of trouble. And I'll give you an example of this. There were a couple people who ended up being RPF'd because there was an event. And at that Scientology event, it was a pre-recorded event, and David Miscavige was speaking on a video monitor. And this was in Los Angeles. There were hundreds of people in attendance, and the sound got funky and started popping in and out. And David Miscavige, therefore, was, being shown in this pre-recorded message as sometimes you could hear him and sometimes you couldn't, and the screen was flashing, and it was a huge problem. This didn't just happen for a couple seconds. This went on and on. It was painful, and it ruined, this whole chunk of the event. Senior Sea Org officers in the Commodore's Messenger org started investigating to find out what the hell was going on, and they found out that the recording had not been previewed by the person who was supposed to do it before the event started, and that person got busted. The other person, who was responsible for all the electronic connections, and he was an electrician, he also got busted. And I think there was somebody else who also got wrangled into that, who did setup of the speakers or something. So all of those people were directly ordered to the RPF by the CMO messengers that day. Like, boom, they were gone. So it can happen that quickly. A very senior Commodore's messenger can directly order somebody to the RPF. David Miscavige could just say, hey, you're gone, you're gone. A missionaire could do that theoretically, although I never actually saw that. Well, I saw that happen one time, but it was also the person who was heading up the Sea Org mission was also a Commodore's messenger. So generally speaking, it takes it takes a senior person in Scientology to be able to just order somebody to the RPF. I was never in a position where that was going to, my senior, when I was in management, did not have that power. Nobody at my level had the power to just order somebody to the RPF. I went to the RPF via a ComEv, a Committee of Evidence. So that's how you get there. And then when you're there, you have an extensive program of actions to get through in order to rehabilitate you. There's all the physical labor, which takes the majority of your day, but 5 hours of the day is spent on what's called redemption time. And you twin up with another RPFer, you're buddied up with them, and you get each other through the program. And there's a lot to the program. I'm not going to get into all the steps of it right now because it's extensive. And like I said, I'm literally going to write an entire book about it. But to graduate the RPF, you have to satisfy all the requirements, and that includes extensive security checking on every aspect of your life, across all, in Scientology terminology, across all 8 dynamics. And the first dynamic is yourself. So you get sec checked on yourself. You get sec checked on on sex and family and on groups and et cetera, all the way out to literally being sec checked on spirits and God and religion and this sort of thing. So it's an extensive series of questions, hundreds of them. It takes months just to get through that, if not years. Plus there's other case handlings that are individually tailored for each person who goes to the RPF to deal with why they ended up on the RPF in the first place. For example, those people who messed up on the stage and on the event would be sec checked and audited Scientology style on evil purposes towards David Miscavige because they messed up David Miscavige's speech, right? And on events and on electronics and on setting things up and anything having to do with their job that they didn't understand or purposefully messed up on or purposefully didn't know what they were doing but they went ahead and did it anyway. All those kind of things. Every one of those things, it's all put under a microscope and you are made to confess anything and everything you did wrong across all of this activity. That is all verified as having been completed before you're allowed to graduate. There are also usually additional actions. I've done another video on what's called the Truth Rundown, which is very deep effort at mind control in Scientology. Probably the most invasive and thought-reforming technique Scientology has. And check out the video on it because I explain all of it in a lot of detail. So that action, the Truth Rundown, is usually done on a person when they're on the RPF after they've done all that sec checking. I received it. I did it on 2 other people during the course of the time that I was on the RPF. Finally, there is what's called the final assessment. And this has not always existed. Like I said, this was only when I was on the RPF. And the final assessment has been around in the late 90s through the 2000s. And if the RPF is still going on anywhere in the world, then I'm sure they're still doing this. The final assessment is an action done on the e-meter where a person is asked questions without necessarily being expected to respond or answer to the questions. The meter is being asked the questions. And I think there were about 18 or 19 questions. And during the assessment, when the questions are being asked, there can't be any slightest reaction on the needle of the e-meter that would indicate that something's wrong or off about any of those questions. All of the questions on the final assessment have to do with whether you have evil intentions, evil purposes, or harmful intentions or desires towards Scientology, senior Scientology executives, David Miscavige in particular, L. Ron Hubbard in particular, or whether you plan, whether you feel you've gotten away with anything. I think there's a couple questions about that on the RPF, whether you, successfully withheld anything. So this assessment is gone through on the e-meter, and if anything comes up, any little flutter of anything on the needle, this is the needle on the e-meter, tick, 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 or reads or responds in some fashion, then the auditor who's running the e-meter is expected to follow up with the person and go, okay, what's going on with this question? Do you have an evil intention towards David Miscavige, for example? And the person is then made to look and get an answer to that question, and it's run through the standard Scientology sec-checking false purpose rundown procedure, which I explain in the Truth Rundown video. So again, you can check that out if you're curious about the details of it. And you have to go through that assessment over and over and over again until it's a clean assessment. No reactions on any of the questions. And it's all done on video. This video and the worksheets and the folder and all of the handlings that the person has done throughout the entire RPF program, which is usually boxes of stuff. Okay, this is like when you submit your graduation, what's called a CSW, completed staff work, an application, let's say, to graduate. It's a box. It's got your pre-clear folder in it. It's got your ethics file in it. It's got any other reports and a whole compendium of summarization of everything that you did while you were on the RPF. It takes weeks to put this stuff together. Each twin, when you're twinned up with somebody else, you put your twins package together. It's called the graduation box or graduation CSW. And your twin puts yours together. Because your twin is responsible for getting you through the program, you're responsible for getting your twin through the program. So this box is put together. The box goes to a senior technical person on for the base that you're on. If you were at Flag, it would be the senior case supervisor for the Flag land base in Clearwater. Just some technical terminology there, but it's basically the senior technical person overseeing all of the auditing, delivery, and all that sort of thing on the base. In the Western United States, where I was, in Los Angeles at the Big Blue buildings, it was the senior case supervisor for the Western United States. That's who the box went to. Once he approves it, he has to watch the video. He has to make sure that there were no reactions on that final assessment. He then goes through all the paperwork and makes sure that it's all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Then it goes to Senior CS International, which is up at the international base. The box literally physically is taken to the gold base in San Jacinto, California. Now, I don't know that Ray Midoff, who was the last person on post as the Senior CS International, is still there or still doing that job, but somebody has to look at that box from that post. And again, watch the video, go through all the paperwork, make sure everything is good. And if it's all good, then the box comes back down to the RTC representative, the Religious Technology Center representative, for the base. They go through the whole thing, make sure everything is good, and if it's all good, then they sign it off, the box comes back, and you're done. Now, if there's something wrong, if any of these people, anyway along the line, see that there was a reaction on the assessment, or there's something weird about the paperwork, or something wasn't handled the way it was supposed to be as far as they're concerned, that box comes back with a reject. And it's written out what the reject is, and the person then has to do a handling on that. The handling is done, everything is put back together, and it goes back through those people again. And all of them have to approve that every step of the program was completed and that you are a shining, glittering product of Scientology and you're ready to get back into work as a Sea Org member. That's how it goes. And when I did mine, the approval line took months. I think it was about a 4-month process for us to go from having a clean final assessment to actually graduating, and that was average, maybe slightly faster than average. I have seen people waiting for their graduation CSW for 6 months because while the boxes are going through these people who the boxes are going to have lots of other things to do. And the RPF are always the last priority for anybody. So you're always at the bottom of the stack. So you're going to be waiting. There's no fast tracking an RPF CSW unless some senior person has their eye on that RPFer and wants them done right away, in which case it might get expedited. But RTC very, very rarely couldn't care less about people who are on the RPF. So it tends to take a while. I actually maybe lucked out a little bit because my twin on the RPF, her name was Galen, she was the mother of the RTC person at the base at the time in Los Angeles. So her daughter, I don't think, was the one who actually looked at the CSW because there would have been a little bit of a conflict of interest there. But I think she had a little bit of interest in getting her mother off the RPF. So I think that was expedited a little bit more than your average bear, but it still took us months to get done. So that's kind of basically the process. There's lots more details to this whole thing. So of course you guys can ask me any other questions you want about it. I know I'm gonna, kind of piecemeal all of this information about the RPF in these critical Q&A videos because, it would be a very, very extensive process for me to even make one video just dedicated to the RPF, which is why I realized I really just need to write a book about it. So I've got a plan on how that's going to happen, but it's going to be a while. And so in the meantime, I'm answering these questions as best I can. I hope that answers your question, Nick. If not, or if you still have any details about this you'd like to know, just let me know.